Yes, 40K players, we have fake news. The news is fake. It's trying to deceive you. There's been a lot of stuff floating around online about current win rates in the meta, and guys, it's all fake. Now, let's jump right on into it. There's been a ton. When you see the 68% win rate for Legion of Excess, 66% win rate for New Custodes, oh, the meta's busted. Fake news. While those statistics aren't actually wrong, the interpretation of them is completely wrong. And I'm going to break it down right now how to actually interpret this really complicated subject because people do not understand what win rates actually reflect. So let's just give you the brief overview. Then I'm going to pull up a bunch of these stats that people have been throwing around and freaking everyone out with, and I'm going to calm everybody down here. All right. Tons of infographics are going around. A lot of these are not even actual tournament data. They're actually just going to be data from practice games in the Tabletop Battles app, which, by the way, I use the Tabletop Battles app and I record all of my games in it. So when you look at all of the data coming out of these Tabletop Battles apps, this is going to include all the Beer Hammer games. This is again going to include me playing against my clients, whether my client is going to be, oh, it's their very first competitive game ever, or it's their 20th competitive game ever. It's still not going to be representative of how armies clash into each other, considering the fact that I have a little bit more experience in that. This includes great players who are just trying out the new Grothammer list against whoever they can grasp over the winter breaks. So let's say you have an amazing player like John Lennon, and he goes home for Christmas and he's hanging out with mom and dad, and there's a local game store, and maybe he goes to the game store and he plays with someone there. Well, guess what? That is not reflective of the relative strengths of the armies just because he wins a few games there that are dominating, 100 points to 20-point games. But that will all be included in the Tabletop Battle app, marked underneath regular regular games, and that's what's going to be included in this data. So we can't really utilize this data as a actual reflection of reality. Instead, when you look at those data tables, you're going to want to think, and we're going to actually analyze it in just a moment. What I want you to do is I want you to think of it as just interesting. That's all. Okay. Win rates in general are just super complicated. So here's the general rules for how you should interpret win rates or how I recommend you interpret win rates. And then I'm going to go through all the data and we're going to talk about it together, okay? First, when a new detachment, a new codex, new whatever is released, generally speaking, the first 1 to 6 weeks after that detachment, codex, or whatever is released, you can pretty much ignore whatever the win rate is as long as it's going to be within the 45 to 60% win rate zone. So you have a brand new codex dropped and they're at a 60% win rate. I generally ignore that, to be completely honest with you, because over the next 6 to 8 weeks, what you're going to see is you're going to see the meta adapt to how that new rule set plays. If it's the very first time you've ever played Genestealer cults, there's practically zero chance you're ever going to win against Genestealer cults. It's just the way it is because you have no idea how to play against it. You have no way how to adapt to the new style of playing. But once you get a few reps, you get a game plan in your head, you start to understand how to handle it. It's not that they're overpowered. It's just that you needed experience into it to learn how to adapt. And that's what we see in the meta all the time. If now there are some exceptions to this. Occasionally on release, you might see a codex or detachment that's in the 30s or the 70% win rates right off the bat. Now, when you see things like that are this extreme, sometimes then I can be convinced that this might actually be an overpowered or an underpowered faction, just like there's kind of a little too much of a ridiculous level. So when we saw Eldar at the beginning of the edition, and they were immediately in the 70s or even 80% win rate brackets, we knew they were broken. But just because something hits 61% win rates over the course of 1 week doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. Sometimes we just got to give it a little time for people to figure out how to play against it. So typically, generally, you're going to want to wait roughly 8 weeks to give people time to adapt to new styles of play to see if win rates start stabilizing. If they do, a lot of times no intervention is necessary and you just need a little bit more time for people to learn how to play against new armies. And that is really no problem. And that's why we see these win rates stabilize over time without actual balance. Now, win rates interpretation can get even more complicated when we start talking about win rates versus events wins. So to give you an example of how complex this stuff can get and why I want to go through this data with you, pre this most recent balanced data slate, the data slate in December of 2024, Dark Eldar had like a 60% win rate. but they had very few, if any, event wins. So even though they were winning more more on average against other armies, they weren't ever taking event wins. That's because they had a higher level of wins at middle tables. But once you understood how to play against Dark Eldar, they were generally not that hard to defeat if you had the good strategy in mind. So at higher level tables of higher level players, Dark Eldar rarely did well at all, but they did great at the middle to lower level tables. And this can be very complicated for balancing factions, and it can give the illusion of a busted faction when it's really not. And on the flip side, let's take the Thousand Suns before their most recent nerfs. Thousand Suns were actually unbelievably busted at the top tables, because when you took a player who understood how to actually correctly use the Thousand Suns, the only way it was really possible to beat them was if you had the perfect matchup or that player just makes mistakes. Now, when you go to a middle tables or lower tables, Thousand Suns were so complicated, it was almost impossible to keep them balanced and keep them good at lower tables and good at top tables. And that's honestly just a design flaw in the army itself, and I can sympathize why it's hard to balance that. So now let's go through some of this actual data. So this is tabletop battles data, and I took this directly off of Goonhammer, so shout out to them. They do a great job of compiling lots of information and lots of stats. So if you want to read their full article or go more in depth, I'll see if I link it. I'll link it down in the description below so you can go check out their stuff. So when we're looking at the Goonhammer app, and this was, I think this was maybe week 4 of December when this was released, maybe week 3. Chaos Demons, the Legion of Excess, out of 124 games, had a 68.6% win rate. Now, is that broken? According to GW standards, yeah, they're going to have to nerf the crap out of that. But this is not tournament data. This includes initial games. This includes just practice games. This includes every game that was just logged into the app. So if I wanted to take, I don't know, Legion of Excess, and I wanted to play it against my buddy who's only played 3 games ever, but they wanted to film a battle report with me, my overwhelming win here actually goes into the statistics. So out of 124 games, which is not many games, they actually ended up with a 68% win rate. That is unreliable, and it doesn't actually give you much information other than Legion of Excess is probably a pretty good faction. But that doesn't mean it's busted. It doesn't mean there's any big problems, because this data literally doesn't mean anything other than this is interesting to see. When we look at the Adeptus Custodes, they have the Solar Spearhead out of 529 games. Now, don't get me wrong, that's a much bigger sample size than 124. They're coming in at a 57.5% win rate. Now, this is interesting as well, and it's a little bit more interesting than I would say the Legion of Excess, simply because there's so many more games logged with it that this might actually be a more accurate number. So we could just kind of keep that in mind. Star Shatter Arsenal at a 56% win rate. This seems realistic, and with almost 1,000 games played, this is probably going to be close-ish to where Star Shatter Arsenal is. Of course, we can't really know until we start getting more tournament data, and there really is very, very, very little tournament data since the balanced data slate in December, seeing as the tournaments from Christmas to now are maybe like 7 total. I mean, there's more than that, but yeah, I'm being hyperbolic. We look at the Plague Legion from Chaos Demons, 57 games for a win rate of 56%. That's not enough games to actually get any meaningful data from. So then it just goes on and down and on and on and on. All right, so let's talk about actual tournament data, okay? Now, actual tournament data, this stuff can be, what we're about to look at next is directly from tournaments, but it's misleading. And it doesn't mean the reporter is lying or being intentionally deceptive at all. Actually, the reporter is a great guy, and he does a really good job of just giving us the information. He's just giving us raw data. But if you look at the raw data, you are going to be misled into coming to certain conclusions. So personally, this is off of, I think, the first 2 weeks of actual tournament data since the balanced data slate. And I'm going to recommend that you're going to completely ignore week-to-week results forever. If it's just, hey, these are the results from this week, that result data, probably useless. Now, when you get 3 months of aggregate data, that's when we're going to start getting more reliable views. All right, so let me show you. This is from 1 week's data on Meta Monday. So shout out to Meta Monday. He does a great job of compiling tournament data, and he puts them all together so that you can see exactly what's going on in the meta at any given time. So the way we read these is, let's take a look at this first one. This is going to be let's just make it a little bit bigger. Oh, darn it. I screwed it up. Forgive me. All right. So we're going to look at the Death Watch here. And the detachment is the Black Spear Task Force. currently their weekend win rate is 65%. Does that mean they're busted broken and they need an emergency nerf? No, it doesn't. As a matter of fact, I think this means almost nothing at all. This first column that says X and O or X and 1, what that means is the amount of lists that went either undefeated at a tournament or only lost once at a tournament, where X is representing the amount of rounds there were. So if they were undefeated, they would be 5-0 instead of XO. If they were 4 wins and 1 loss, they would be 4-1 or X and 1. All right. Now, the amount of event wins of the Black Spear Task Force was 1. So there's literally 1 Black Spear Task Force that went undefeated. There were only 5 people who played Black Spear Task Force. One of them went undefeated. That is naturally going to skyrocket the win rate. And there were 14 wins total and 23 games total played, meaning someone must have had to drop from a tournament or something. So does that mean that they have an actual 65% win rate? No. It means that one guy won a tournament this weekend and there weren't that many games played. That does not mean there's anything busted or broken about it. Let's look at the next one. Astra Militarum with a total of 58% win rates. Bridgehead Strike. Now, I do personally think Bridgehead Strike is overpowered. Simply from my own experience playing through it and going and understanding exactly what that army can do, there is no way it's going to stabilize at a 70% win rate, though. There's no way it's that high. But for this weekend, it had a 70% win rate. They had 5 X and O or X and 1 results. They had 2 event wins. There were only 7 players who played them, so that means 2 people won, meaning 2 people were probably undefeated. So that's obviously going to skyrocket the win rate. Out of 26 wins and 37 games played total. And then the combined regiment is still sitting at a pretty 53%, and that's going to be the index detachment. So is this actually reliable data? Well, it's reliable data for what happened this weekend, but it's not reliable data of how good the detachment is. So if you're like freaking out, oh, Guard has a 70% win rate. Yes, technically they have a 70% win rate for this one weekend, but does that mean that they are a 70% faction? No, not at all. Necron, Star Shatter Arsenal sitting at the 60% win rate. Hypercrypt Legion sitting at 56% win rate. So here's why we don't pay attention to weekend data. Hypercrypt Legion was at like a 48% win rate before the balanced data slate, and they only got worse after the balanced data slate because they no longer have access to the 3-inch deep strike, and it is now a 6-inch deep strike, and your Satans went up in points. So how did a Hypercrypt Legion go up in win rate when they got worse? That's why you cannot take these on weekend data points at face value. Like I said, the reporter is not lying. They're not being deceptive at all. It's just the nature of data. Data is very easily misinterpreted. Adeptus Custodes, if we look at it, we have a 66% win rate for the Solar Spearhead. That sounds great. Does that mean that the new Custodes are busted? Not even a little bit. Now, having played quite a few games and coached quite a few games with Solar Spearhead, I'll tell you, I do believe that as the meta adapts and people learn how to play against Dreadnoughts, you will probably see that this detachment stays at the 51 to 52% win rate. It is a good faction. It's probably the best detachment that the Custodes have right now. But is it overpowered? No. People just are not prepared for how to play against 3 Telemons and 3 Contemptor Dreadnoughts. Once people learn how to do that, it's going to be a much easier matchup, and you're not going to have to worry about it nearly as much. Talons of the Emperor dropping to 38%, even though they literally just won the World Championship. How does that make sense? It doesn't. It makes 0 sense. That's why you pay 0 attention to data that is, this is what happened this weekend, other than, oh, how cool, that's what happened that weekend. But it means nothing for the greater thing. Drukari Reaper's Wager got a 55% win rate, whereas Sky Splinter Assault got a 50%. Everyone's saying Reaper's Wager sucks, but it didn't this weekend. But that's literally all it means. It just means that it didn't suck this weekend. And then lastly, just to go through a few more, just to show you how ludicrous it is when people take a little snapshot of data and say that, oh, this army is overpowered or this army is too weak. This is going to show you some really extreme skews of that. And by the way, the guy who does Meta Monday is not making this claim. That is, so don't say that's what I'm claiming. That's what I'm saying. It's not. This is other people on Reddit and on Discords and stuff that are making these claims, and I just want everyone to cool themselves down. Dark Angels with Vanguard Spearhead at a 70% win rate for the weekend. That doesn't mean Dark Angels Vanguard Spearhead needs to be nerfed. Lion's Blade with a 33% win rate. Does that mean Lion's Blade is a terrible detachment? No, Lion's Blade is fan-freaking-tastic. It's exceptionally good. It's significantly better than Vanguard Spearhead in my opinion, but that doesn't mean anything. It's just weekend results over the course of one weekend. Space Wolves Champions of Rust went up to a 70% win rate. Once again, no, they don't need to be nerfed. But a Stormlance task force for Space Wolves had a 23%. That doesn't mean that it's the worst army in the game. Iron Storm Spearhead at a 58% win rate. And then finally, we can go all the way down to Gladius at a 38% win rate. Does that mean Gladius sucks? No, it doesn't. Gladius is still amazing. Librarius Conclave at literally a 0% win rate. Oh my gosh. Emergency, panic, panic, panic. But Librarius Conclave is not a 0% win rate, people. It just didn't win this weekend because from the tournaments that were gathered, no one took Librarius that happened to be good with them, I suppose. And then lastly, let's just take a quick look at the Orcs. Dreadmob dropping to 20%. That's ludicrous, seeing as Dreadmob just got much, much better with the balanced data slate and the new troops that are available to it. So that is just a stupid statistic. It's just a wild one-off that happened this weekend. So guys, listen, when you look at these win rates and these percentages, if you see wild numbers, I highly recommend you just be a little skeptical of it. I love Meta Monday. I read his stuff and I appreciate the work that he does. So I'm not telling you that there's anything wrong with it. I'm trying to tell you how to interpret it. When he reports this data, that's literally all he's doing. He's just reporting this is what happened this weekend. So check it out. Like him. Actually, give that guy a little subscription. He does good work. Goonhammer 2, by the way, they're not making any claims on this Grotmus detachment win rates. They're just saying, hey, this is what the app is showing right now. But this isn't in tournament play, so this isn't like skilled players playing against each other. This could be wildly skewed. So don't give them any hate at all. I love the work that they do, and you should as well. So with that, guys, I'm going to take off. But this is what win rates are, guys. They can be fake news at time. Anyway, with that, I'm going to pop off for now, and I'll be back with some... Actually, I think I got some good list reviews I want to be bringing to you later today, hopefully, but it might have to wait till more tomorrow. We'll see. Until next time, crump on. Bye-bye.